was to create a new federal task force on fighting anti-Christian bias.
But no one will be touching the cross of Christ under the Trump administration. I swear to you, that will never happen. Never happen. And we have to save our country. But Christians, they can't afford to sit on the sidelines in this fight. They have to really get out there. They have to do what they have to do, and they have to win.
There's a war taking place here, and there has to be somebody who's going to win in this war. What is this war about? Well, I'd say Revelation 12, verse 17. There was a great war being made on the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And that war was made by the dragon in Revelation chapter 12. But interestingly, in times past, that dragon has worked through emperors like Constantine and pagan Rome. I want to share with you something very similar that happened in time past when the dragon made war and tried to win against the people. And it had to do with a federal task force. It had to do with trying to treat Christians benevolently and give them tolerance and understand that Christians were good people and everything else like that. But it was the state that tried to enforce something that was contrary to the consciences of many people during these times. Let's take a look here. History is repeating itself. In AD 313, an executive order was signed by Constantine. It was similar to what Donald Trump has ordered and signed in the past. Constantine's order called for the Edict of Milan, which according to Wikipedia.com was a law ordering the people of the Roman Empire to treat Christians benevolently within the Roman Empire. Constantine was considered to be a really good Christian who really helped to give power back to the church. And it was about bestowing tolerance upon Christianity and other religions so that people could have their freedoms. Religious liberty was what it was about for Constantine. In Great Controversy, page 49, though, it says that nominal conversion of Constantine in the early part of the 4th century, it caused great rejoicing. Very similar to what we see today with regards to men like Donald Trump. And the world, cloaked with a form of righteousness, walked into the church. Now the work of corruption rapidly progressed. That was what happened when Constantine was elected, was the work of corruption rapidly progressed. And though the world rejoiced at Constantine coming into the church, the problem was they didn't understand what they were allowing in the church and what the church became at this point. You see, when you want to force religion onto the people, the world is going to walk into the church. In Great Controversy, page 53, we further read that in the early part of the 4th century, the Emperor Constantine issued a decree making Sunday a public festival throughout the Roman Empire. The Day of the Sun was reverenced by his pagan subjects and was honored by Christians. It was the emperor's policy to unite the conflicting interests of heathenism and Christianity. And the word heathenism is another word for Gentile or nations. Let us be like the nations in the Bible. I'll come back to that in a second, but I believe history is repeating itself. Constantine and Trump, is history repeating itself? It definitely is. You know what's interesting though? Albert Pike, a 33rd degree Mason, once wrote, "Whenever the people need a hero, we shall supply them. We shall supply them with a hero." And interestingly, it seems like the people always seem to need a hero. They need a king, or they need somebody who's going to help. The Bible talks about these people that wanted a king. Give us a king. Ultimately, they desired a king to go out, fight their battles for them, and to stand before them and really fight off the enemy. And that was something that happened during the times of the Israelites. They said, give us a king that we can be like the heathen or the nations. That's what it says. We want to be like the rest of the people, the nations. And eventually it came to the point where they had declared that we have no king but Caesar, and they ended up crucifying the King of Kings, the King of Heaven, and declaring that the kings of the earth were their actual husband, their bride. They were the bride of the kings of the earth. Very similar to Revelation chapter 17, where we see a woman who fornicates with the kings of the earth. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we continue here. But in the previous administration of Trump, Jeff Sessions, who's working on behalf of Trump for the Justice Department, announced a religious liberty task force to combat dangerous secularism. So what is it that Trump is seeking today? What is he promising to the national religious broadcasters and all the Christians today? A religious liberty task force to combat against dangerous secularism. That's what the task force is for. In secularism, if you look it up, you'll find out that it is the principle of a separation of the state from religious institutions. In other words, it's the principle of the separation of church and state. And they have a task force to combat those who believe in separation of church and state. They regard people who believe in separation of church and state as a danger to society. Another attorney general of Trump's wanted God's moral order enforced by government. That would include, of course, the Sabbath. But what Sabbath, of course, would that be, since the papacy has a different Sabbath than the Bible, and they even tell us that. We'll get to that in a second. But can government enforce moral order? Is it called the moral government? No, it's called the civil government. There is a distinction between civil and moral government. The moral government is God's moral government. He is the only one that can enforce whether a man is lusting after a woman. He's the only one that can execute the judgment. He's the only one who can truly give forgiveness if that man asks for forgiveness. And he's the only one that can judge the heart. He's the only moral governor in the universe, true moral governor in the universe. But when man seeks to take that upon themselves instead of executing civil government is meant to protect you. It's given by God to protect you, protect your property, protect your person, protect you as a people from people who might be uncivil. But moral government is God's, and there is a clear distinction. The Bible clearly distinguishes. It says, give unto God what is God's, and give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. We don't give marriage to Caesar. We don't give the Sabbath to Caesar. These are not Caesar's to be given. Well, you give marriage to Caesar, Caesar will redefine it, and they'll marry a bunch of men with men and force it on the church and all these kinds of things. That is called moral government, and that is God. Only God can join two together. It's not Caesar who joins the two together. The Bible says that clearly, but not many of us are reading our Bibles very clearly these days. But I want you to read this. This is what the papacy tells us, the Pope. He says, of course, the Catholic Church claims that the change Saturday Sabbath to Sunday was her act, and the act is a mark of her ecclesiastical authority in religious things. This is talking about the papacy, the papal power. And she has a mark, her mark of authority and authorship. She authored 10 commandments, which are different than the 10 commandments of God. God says the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord, and that is on a Saturday. And the papacy says we worship on Sunday, and we claim this is our mark of authority. And if you follow her as an author, you're not following the Bible. She even tells you this in the next quote. She says, Sunday is our mark of authority. The church is above the Bible. Are you a Bible-believing Christian, or are you a papal-following Christian? But the church is above the Bible, she says, and this transference of Sabbath observance is proof of that fact. So she's telling you, she's changed the day from the seventh day to Sunday, the day of the sun. And you know, when Christians want to enforce laws, usually they don't enforce the proper laws, and a lot of times what comes out of it is persecution takes place. In fact, they even killed the Prince of Life using the state, a church and state union, when they said, we have no king but Caesar. And they did this during the Dark Ages, even from the early Christians. For the most part, early Christians were persecuted because they didn't accept the dogmas that were being pushed by the emperors. The emperors began to push these things. And this is no different. It was even before Christ that these problems occurred, when moral government was enforced by men like Nebuchadnezzar, who tried to enforce religious laws by the state, forcing people to worship an image that they made out of gold. And ultimately, this was contrary to the commandments of God, and God's people will stand up against these things, these images. But there's going to be something very similar in the end times. The Bible says that there's an image of the beast that many people will be forced to worship. And I'll talk about what a beast is and an image of the beast here in a second, because I think when you understand the papacy to be the beast, and a beast is a kingdom, Daniel 7:23, then you'll understand that there's another beast that's coming, an image of the beast, Revelation 13:11. We'll look at this in a second. It says again, Matt Whitaker, another attorney general of Trump, said a biblical view of justice is necessary. And he once said that judges should not have a secular view. That means they should not believe in a separation of church and state. They mean to believe in a union of church and state. So any judges that are coming along have to believe in the union of church and state. And so therefore, all these judges that are being appointed by Donald Trump, I think there was 180 or something during his last administration, all these judges are to have, or shouldn't have, a secular view. They shouldn't have a disbelief in the union of church and state. And all of this is going to fulfill Bible prophecy. And I'll explain why. See, Thomas Jefferson once said, erecting the wall of separation between church and state is absolutely essential in a free society. In the book of Revelation, chapter 13 and verse 2, it tells us that the dragon gives his power to the first beast. That is church, that is the state giving power, the emperors of Rome giving power over to the papal church and state union. But there's going to be something similar. Another beast comes up out of the earth, and it will exercise all the same power as the first beast. And it will eventually speak as a dragon. And this is going to cause freedom to disappear in America. But the separation of church and state is absolutely essential in a free society. So when freedom disappears and there is no separation of church and state, then the two will disappear together. That is what is coming very soon. In fact, the fourth president of the United States and one of the writers of the Constitution, who put this clause into the Constitution, says that the purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe in blood for centuries. James Madison. James Madison understood why there was separation of church and state. It was to keep the church from trying to gain power over the state and use this power to persecute, as it did during the centuries of the Dark Ages, where Rome destroyed over 50 to 150 million martyrs. They uprooted entire nations. They destroyed entire people and destroyed all their writings and outlawed the Bible and forced people to worship a certain way. And this has been happening for centuries. And this is the reason that the First Amendment clause is in the Constitution, to keep the church from gaining power over the state. Some people think it was just to keep the power of the state from gaining power in the church. It's not. It's to keep the church from getting power over the state. It's both of them, really, because they work together and they use each other. But we need to understand why that Constitution was given, because it was for the people and by the people, to protect the people from a majority that might go crazy and might turn on the people and might actually do things that are not righteous, such as they did during the Dark Ages, the papal power. Nothing new under the sun. Even the Jews did the same thing to Jesus Christ when they put him on the cross. And they said, "We have no king but Caesar." They united with the state in order to do this. Church and state unions result in persecution always. And there is no new thing under the sun. This is Mike Johnson. I want you to hear what he has to say. Now, of course, remember, he is the Speaker of the House. He speaks on behalf of Congress. And not just that, but he is also third in line to the presidency of the United States. And some of his views in regards to church and state. He really wants to unite the state with the church. Listen to what he says carefully. He wants a state-sponsored religion. Christian nationalism is what it's being called.
But Jefferson clearly did not mean that metaphorical wall was to keep religion from influencing issues of civil government. To the contrary, it was meant to keep the federal government from impeding the religious practice of citizens. The founders wanted to protect the church from an encroaching state, not the other way around.
Clearly, he didn't read James Madison's words when James Madison understood, and he hasn't read a lot of history to understand that the other way around is the way it is to keep the church from gaining power over the state. Whenever the church seeks to obtain power of the state, it always seeks to persecute those who would differ with regards to its doctrines. And that is what the problem is, and we have to be very careful of that. See, interestingly, the Bible says that the dragon gives power to the papacy. And so too, we're going to see another nation speak like a dragon. It's going to have the voice of the dragon. And it's also going to exercise all the same power. The power that was given by the dragon is going to exercise all the same power as the first beast. And this beast is none other than the United States. And I want you to hear what Donald Trump is saying about giving power back to the church and state union, and also speaking, the voice, speaking like a dragon. Listen carefully.
His bite back on that. But for 4 years, we went through a great period. You were able to speak. And we're going to make that on a permanent basis. You're going to be able to do it because you're the people we want to hear from, the pastors and the ministers and the rabbis. The people in this room are the people we want to hear from, and they have to have a political voice. You know, if you think about it, you have men, you have women, and you have religion. If you look at it, you have more than the men, you have more than the women. You have such power, but you weren't allowed to use that power. And you're now allowed to use it. I get in there, you're going to be using that power at a level that you've never used it before. It's going to bring back the churchgoer. I mean, you have to see. I don't like the charts when I see charts where they're going in the wrong direction.
Revelation 13 verse 2, right? Or 13 verse 2, giving all the power. And Revelation 13:12, it exercised all the same power as the first beast. Donald Trump, again, he tells Brody File, I want to give power back to the church. I want the church to have power. And not only that, but he vows to close the gap between church and state. He's vowing to close the gap between church and state. The purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores what happened in the times of the Dark Ages. That's what our previous presidents have written in regards to. But Donald Trump is vowing, he's making many vows. In fact, Trump vows to create a federal task force combating, making war with the anti-Christian bias in the second term. Of course, that is those who believe in secularism. That is, of course, somebody who might be like James Madison. And it's making war with these things. Revelation 12:17. The dragon makes war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. These vows, these many vows that Trump is offering, seem like some kind of union is taking place. Maybe a marriage union of some sort. Maybe some are coming together and there's a holy matrimony taking place. And it is maybe not so holy when you look at the details of it. You'll start to understand that there is some unholiness behind this. Very similar to Revelation chapter 17, where it talks about the whore of Babylon fornicating with the kings of the earth. There's a fornication taking place, and it is not a marriage, because the marriage of the bride is with God, and her church, the true church, is married to God. She does not go to the kings of the earth and fornicate with them. But there is a story in the Bible very similar regarding John the Baptist, regarding Herod and Herodias. And perhaps you're familiar with her daughter who did a dance before Herod, and then Herod promised her up to half the kingdom, and she asked for whatever she wanted, and she asked for the head of John the Baptist. It's very similar to what's going to happen in these times, where we have a woman, the mother of harlots in Revelation chapter 17, and she's going to demand the heads of those who refuse to go along with her policies, secularists, so to say. They might be standing against the union of church and state. See, whenever power is sought, usually by the state, it is to make war against the remnant seed. And one of these ways in which they are seeking this power is called Project 2025. And I want you just to read this. It's the project, the Rights Project 2025 wants to make faith the government's job. Project 2025 appears to call on the next Republican president to draw distinctions between parts of the law as religious and non-religious. Now, if you understand the First Amendment, it says no religious law should be made. So why would they draw distinctions between religious and non-religious? Any religious law is unconstitutional. It's contrary to the Constitution. But furthermore, in this article from MSNBC talking about Jonathan Berry, the U.S. Labor Department, who wrote the part in regards to the Labor Department, he says in his section, and he's worked for Donald Trump in time past, Berry worries that God ordained the Sabbath as a day of rest. And until very recently, the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate by moral and legal regulation of work on that day, and blames consumerism and secularism for the decline in Sabbath observance. And of course, secularism being believing in the separation of church and state. Now, what are we turning back to? What does the Sabbath involve? Well, these Protestants, for the most part, do not realize that by observing Sunday, they accept the authority of the spokesman of the church, the Pope. And that is its mark of authority, the mark of the beast. Revelation chapter 13. It's Sunday. Sunday is the mark of the papal authority. And most Christians today do not realize this as the mark of the beast. But in regards to America and how it's founded, this is what we read in the Great Controversy, page 441. It says, among the Christian exiles who first fled to America and sought an asylum from royal oppression, think about that, royal, kingly, and priestly intolerance, were many who determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. Their views found place in the Declaration of Independence, which sets forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. These principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. So, The constitutional republic is the secret of the power and prosperity. Protestantism means protesting against the papal power and what it did during the Dark Ages, and particularly its church and state power. These were principles that were founded in the Constitution. Separation of church and state is a Protestant principle, and that is the government that was founded in America. That was written over 120 years ago. But the Bible does tell us in Revelation 13:10 regarding the papacy, the beast, that it would be captured at one point. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. In 1798, the Pope was captured by France, and the power was taken away from the papacy during this time. And he that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. He died in captivity. But church and state power was removed. The crowns were gone. Revelation 13:1 tells us this beast had 10 horns and 10 crowns. It was monarchy. It was power. But another beast comes up in Revelation 13:11, a kingdom. And it come up out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. So it comes up with lamb-like principles. This is the lamb-like principles of the Constitution. The horns representing the power, the church, the state, no crowns, no pope, and no king. And the bison, of course, is the symbol of the United States. It joins the bald eagle as a symbol of the United States. It's a 2-horned beast with no crowns on those horns. But in America, they declared independence from a king, from the King of England, from a crown, from a monarchy. And that was the reason they declared independence, was because of what was happening, that there was no recognition of liberty and understanding of liberty. And they were very, very harsh powers that ruled during this time. But we, the people, declared independence, and that was the government established by the people, for the people. And it was different than having a king that ruled over them as peasants. And we're turning back to that kind of government, however, in these days. You know, King George maybe, or King Obama, or maybe King Trump. Which one is going to be the king? But this is what we're looking at right now, is that a lot of people are asking, declaring that they want a king. Give us a king. We want a monarchy. In America, a president is elected and not a king. The founding fathers fought a war to get freedom from monarchy, and that was what they fought for. But we're turning back to that. See, America is not a democracy, and you'll hear all these presidents talking about democracy prevailing, but it is a constitutional republic, and there is an important difference between them. Thomas Jefferson said a democracy is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people may take away the rights of the other 49. It is where people control other people and there's no law to protect them. But a constitutional republic is where 2% of people might believe something and the other 98% don't agree, and they might want to take away the rights of that 2%. But the Constitution protects that 2%, and it protects the minority, and protects their freedom, protects their liberty, which a lot of people don't want. But the United States is not a democracy, it is a republic. Ben Franklin said democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. See, in a democracy, the majority rules. In a republic, the individual is protected from the majority. And it's Christian nationalism is very similar to globalism. But individualism is different. Nationalism always seeks to make laws to protect against those who would come against it. See, Hitler was a nationalist until he eventually wanted to become a globalist. There's a problem with those nationalism. Nationalism is not a good thing. And nationalism usually turns into, the Jews. What did the Jews do to protect their nation? They killed Jesus Christ. They said if he dies, it will save the nation. And of course, he died to save the world. But anyways, continuing on. The papacy, the powers that be, these are powers that want monarchy and crowns. And it's more so the people that demand it. But we are to call these men to repentance, and we're to call these men to understand that they're not to rule over anybody. It shall not be like that among Christians. You can read that in Matthew 21. But finally, Revelation 13:12 telling us he exercises, that is the image of the beast, America, will exercise all the power of the first beast, church and state power, and cause the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, that is the papacy, whose deadly wound was healed. Most of the world is turning back to the papacy. They're starting to come back to Romanism, Catholicism. But we need discernment. We need to understand that there is one religion, one church, one body, and that church is not married to the state. She is separate from the state, and she is a secular. And there's a war going on against those who understand this. There's a war against Protestants. There's a war against those who believe and understand secularism, and there is religious liberty task force that are being designed and created by the Trump administration to actually come against those who do not accept a union of church and state. And that's coming very soon, to make war against them, to fight. And they say they will win this fight. Well, this is the great battle that is mentioned in the book of Revelation, the battle of Armageddon, the war against the Lamb. And they will war against the Lamb and the Lamb-like principles in which America was established on, not realizing that it was established on a separation of church and state to keep forever from these shores the blood that has been shed and filled the soil of Europe for centuries. And so, anyways, I want to close with this. I'm going to allow Donald Trump to speak a few words, and I pray that we discern and understand where they come from and what spirit they are of.
So the man walking, I was in Trump Tower, I pointed down to the sidewalk. There were people walking on the sidewalk. I said, then those people walking on the sidewalk are more powerful than you people in the clergy, the pastors, the ministers, the priests, the people in the clergy. They're more powerful. They said, that's right. I said, not going to happen anymore. They're really being silenced. We can't let that happen. We're not going to let it happen. And we're going to get that thing repealed. And think of the power we have over the Democrats, over the Republicans. We are giving our churches their voices back. We are giving them back in the highest form.